Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on regional harmonization of the remittance policies in the IGAD region. Today, we're going to talk about the case of Somalia's regulatory landscape for remittances. My name is Louis, and I will be your host for today. I'm going to give a few logistic notes before we move to the agenda that you should see on the screen right now. So this webinar will last for about 1 hour. We'll share the recording with all participants after the webinar, and it will be also made available on YouTube. And we have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So please use the Q&A option you see if you have any question to the panelist or the presenter.
So migrant remittances directly impact indicator 10C of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG. And among the targets is to reduce the remittance costs to less than 3%. And throughout this presentation, we'll be mentioning about remittances, and will mean migrant remittances. Remittances to Africa are important, highlighting their role in macroeconomic stability, poverty alleviation, and financial inclusion. Generally, remittances represent the most stable source of income and have been the largest source of international financial flows to Africa since 2010, accounting for about a third of total external financial inflows. In Somalia, remittances help increase the disposable income of migrant families, which leads to increased consumption and investment, including investment in health, education, and local business. Annual remittance inflow to Somalia in 2022 through official channels, as reported by the World Bank, stood at around 1.7 billion US dollars. This is equivalent to 21.3% of the Somali GDP. Migrants from Somalia worldwide reached 2 million, or 12% approximately of the total Somali population. And intra-regional migration is predominant, which is around 60%. The average cost of sending remittances to Somalia per 200 US dollars is around 8.5%. And the cost of intra-regional remittances is even higher at 10.6%, which is far above the SDG target. So migration, as I've said, in Somalia is high and is increasing. Likewise, remittance flows to Somalia is also increasing. In this webinar today, we are delighted to present a brief about an assessment of the remittance policy and regulatory landscapes in Somalia, and an implementation roadmap for addressing the challenges facing remittance flows as part of a larger project, namely the IGAD Regional Harmonization of Remittance Policies, which is an implementation by IGAD and UNCDF. The IGAD, here we mean the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and it comprises the 8 countries in the East and the Horn of Africa. The project on regional harmonization of remittance policies was initiated like 3 years ago and is ongoing, with the objective of coming up with a conducive policy and regulatory frameworks and supporting payment infrastructure to facilitate the affordable and accessible remittance services that will drive remittance costs down and increase flows through formal digital channels. In this regard, the main activities under the project include improving the relevant laws and regulation, because having an enabling regulatory environment for remittances is essential to achieving policy goals. A good starting point under this activity has been to create a shared understanding of a regulatory framework specifically focused on remittances. This is a collaborative approach with which we worked and we will still be working with policymakers and regulators in the IGAD region, including Somalia, to bring their priorities to action while ensuring change is sustainable and aligned with global best practices. To support an enabling framework for remittances, we have identified enablers that form part of the convergence criteria, and that must be aligned at a regional level after being examined at a national level. These fundamental enablers or convergence criteria include: 1, proportionate and non-discriminatory licensing procedures for remittance service providers; 2, proportionate prudential supervision; 3, financial integrity and risk management; 4, adequate level of consumer protection and complaints resolution mechanisms; and 5, proportionate forex regulations. Activity 2 is on improvement of payment infrastructures. As we know, these are the digital rails of the cross-border payments. This involves leveraging on the existing payment infrastructure to support cost-effective solutions to achieve cross-border interoperability and harmonization of operating standards of this payment infrastructure to lower the cost of remittances. And a third important activity under the project is capacity building to strengthen the capacity of key stakeholders, including regulatory institutions and policymakers. Somalia recognizes remittances as a tool for economic development and meeting income security for many households. However, this fact is often met by an unpleasant reality that the potential of remittances to support sustainable development is not fully met because remittance flows to Somalia are faced with some challenges and frictions. The good news is that Somalia's central bankers and policymakers appreciate this truth. We all agree that recognizing a problem is an important first step toward a solution. There is a continuing need to seize everyday opportunities for economic growth and social development by addressing these challenges and frictions. So the Regional Harmonization of Remittance Policy Project, under the leadership of the IGAD Secretariat, in collaboration with the UNCDF and country regulators and policymakers, is a step ahead in that direction. From the study, we have noted some of the inhibitors, challenges, and options for reforms. And these inhibitors, challenges, and options for reforms have been divided into internal and external. Internally, Somalia's remittance market still suffers from many inefficiencies and obstacles, including but not limited to persistent of informal remittance flows, high remittance transaction costs, unfavorable policy and regulatory environment for non-bank remittance service providers, limited capacity and lack of systems to monitor and analyze remittance flows at the transaction level, lack of secure digital remittance channels, and a limited offering of remittance-linked financial products to serve the migrants and their families. But some actions by the side countries are part of the inhibitors as well. For example, governments of the side countries have their national security objectives or a foreign policy agenda affecting customer onboarding processes or KYC for Somali senders. At the same time, countries wishes to maintain their correspondent banking relationships to avoid de-risking at the expense of restricting relationships with Somalia remittance service providers, which can at times be perceived as among the high-risk jurisdictions. And here, de-risking involves external financial institutions, terminating or restricting business relationships indiscriminately with broad categories of clients in Somalia, including remittance service providers, rather than analyzing and managing the client's risks in a targeted manner. Such a practice is inconsistent with the risk-based approach that is the cornerstone of the anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism frameworks. And to avoid de-risking practices and also to avoid low profitability by these big external international remittance service providers, especially banks, sometimes they avoid dealing with customers from Somalia, both individuals and remittance service providers in Somalia that are perceived as high risk. Further de-risking is because external institutions avoid low profitability, which may result from the requirement to invest additional resources for implementing AML-CFT compliance measures and the systems for high-risk customers and the possibility of heavy fines in the case of AML-CFT screening failures. In that regard, remittance service providers in Somalia sometimes received notices of termination of correspondent banking relationships from international banks without notice or without explanations or without any reason behind such move, making it difficult for Somali authorities and remittance service providers to address the situation. So from the study, we say these inhibitors can be addressed, and we have come up with possible reform options for reforms. And here we urge partner governments from the send side would analyze account termination notices and notice periods and identify ways to support more extended notice periods with reasons and areas the Somali government could address. Also, partner governments from the send side would work to modernize the sanctions regime and recognize the need to precisely calibrate sanctions to mitigate unintended economic, political, and humanitarian impacts. Internally, the Central Bank of Somalia would promote consistently supervisor expectations, including training of staff responsible for supervising remittance service providers so that all the risks can be minimized or mitigated. Central Bank of Somalia could also consider proposing regulations that require financial institutions to have reasonably designed risk-based AML-CFT programs, possibly taking into considerations the non-bank remittance service providers and effects on financial inclusion. The Somali government could expand international cooperation and consider creative options with international counterparts to address the decline in correspondent banking relationship. Also, the Central Bank of Somalia could extend more support efforts by international financial institutions, including multilateral development banks, to address the risking through related projects and technical assistance. The Central Bank of Somalia also could continue to assess the opportunities, risks, and the challenges of innovative and emerging technologies in Somalia for AML-CFT compliance solutions, such as development and implementation of government and private sector provided digital identity solutions that comply with applicable technical standards to enable appropriate risk-based customer identification and authentication, and encourage adoption of these digital identity solutions by banks and remittance service providers. The Central Bank of Somalia could encourage public and private sector engagements, particularly in the remittance service provider and the regulator, including providing greater clarity on risk-focused anti-money laundering supervisory framework and regulatory environments and encouraging information exchange. Also, the Central Bank of Somalia can enact law for regulation of microfinance business in the country because microfinance institutions play a significant role in terminating remittances, especially in the underserved areas. So the roadmap or the options for reforms contains some reforms actions and include the ones I've mentioned and many other more, such as to adopt a consistent legal approach for licensing and authorizing non-bank remittance service providers, to introduce sound monetary policies that will stabilize the local currency and have predictable exchange rates, because currently the lack of effective monetary policy has been the cause of the local currency to be very volatile and fluctuate rapidly against foreign currency. So that also will help to address the challenges and the frictions facing remittances. Also, to have a harmonized financial consumer protection framework and many others. So on the payment infrastructure, the Central Bank of Somalia may consider improving existing infrastructure arrangements to support the requirements for cross-border payments, market payments, and aiming at attaining a straight-through processing, aligning the processes and increasing operating hours across systems, and support efforts that are geared towards putting in place an integrated infrastructure interoperable with mobile network operations. Also establish retail payment systems like national switch, and also introduce guidelines that can harmonize application programming interfaces protocols for data exchange across payment systems, and also integrate the ID systems into the payment infrastructures. So in summary, over time, since the report was finalized, there has been a lot of positive developments that have been registered in Somalia. And Somalia has been working on some of these gaps, as we shall hear shortly from the colleagues from Somalia. So with that, I can end up by presenting this roadmap here, which contains the 5 lines of inquiry that the observations and the options for reforms have been categorized into. And we have captured what worked and what didn't work, and what actions alongside the policymaker and the regulator can prioritize and take action. So the implementation of the activities under this roadmap would help remove unnecessary barriers to the establishment, licensing, and the operations of remittance service providers, while at the same time reducing duplication of regulatory efforts, enhancing transparency, bringing in fair competition, more choice for customers, and enhanced consumer protection. With that, I thank you very much for listening.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Do you hear me or listen to me?
Yeah, we do.
We are the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, the Federal Republic of Somalia. We have a mandate of the ministry. The ministry handles issues on the foreign policy for the ministry, the trade and investment, the money, travel, issuing passport for the migrants, and support of Somalia abroad and in country. You know, when we talk about the support of Somalia abroad, the Consular Affairs Unit of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs ensures the safety of Somali citizens abroad. The department can be reached all year round, 24 hours a day. The Somali citizens who are in the districts or other difficulties can obtain assistance from the Somali Consular Department in the embassy, in the Somali Foreign Ministry, or in the Somali Foreign Missions. That means the embassy in the outside Somalia. Assistance can include this advice and information about any problem they can see it, releasing of lost or stolen Somali passport in the outside Somalia, measures in connection with serious illness or death of Somali citizen abroad. That's a emergency case. Also measures in connection with major accident and disaster involving Somali citizens abroad. About the diaspora engagement project, now the multi-year project aims to strengthen the institutional and operational capacity of the diaspora affairs responsible for engage the diaspora in the development of Somalia. It also aims to increase the engagement with the diaspora a high level since the diaspora remains and defining constituencies for the development of Somalia, and they will become even more decisive in the future. More importantly, the project will also support the government and diaspora to partner closely in the development of efforts geared for achieving some of the key targets of the sustainable development goals in the country 2030. Unfortunately, this project has not been put into action as the department is still looking for the funds to implement it. The department has collaborated with the African Diaspora Policy Center, ADPC, on this, and it will be kick off once the necessary funds are required. We have a large challenge faced by Somali immigrants. First one is the language barrier. If the Somali citizen travel to Western or another country, the most challenge is the language. Second is the rejection of foreign qualification, which could lead to unemployment, where some Somali people will find very difficult to socialize. The third one is the immigration status. Somali immigrants report that their documents were questioned by the host country officers, and the process of obtaining legal status was protected. The fourth one is lack of immigration status or permanent residence status prevent the majority of Somali refugees from using social service and programs. The most question is where remittances are invested in Somalia. First thing is home, food, education. That's what the people use daily: home, food, education, medical bills. Also, the agriculture, which is the agriculture in Somalia. The agriculture in Somalia is the important or the most of is like the agriculture with the livestock raising, surprising crops, and continue to grow exponentially. Third one is fishing, telecommunication, energy, manufacturing, ICT, construction, and also tourism and hospitality. The factors handling diaspora investment. There are a couple of things. The first thing, the political insecurity and conflict. Building trust, political stability is critical to increase diaspora investment in Somalia. That's a big issue. The second one is the poor infrastructure due to the destruction of the civil war. There are no good road and there are no good infrastructure in Somalia. The third one is the insecurity has enhanced international infrastructure due to the ongoing war against the Al-Shabaab right now. Last one is the lack or inadequate access to social services. What we're doing or what on the way forward? Now, first, the strategy, Somali, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Diaspora Department, they have a strategy. The first one is encourage relevant institution to develop great diaspora investment in housing and rural and urban development in Somalia. Second one is the diaspora mapping. There are more than 2 million Somalis outside the country. We need to help in identifying the number of diaspora who send back home remittance and also their skills. Third one is awareness campaigns on the diaspora's policy in order to encourage them to return of their home country and also to invest at home. Fourth one is political stability to be formed within the country in order to attract our Somali diaspora abroad, to also attract the qualified national to contribute to the Somali development. Also, establish a diaspora advice council. We are here establish this council to enhance the engagement process between the government and the Somali diaspora and show commitment to collaborate and partnership approach to diaspora engagement. Also establish a microfinance crowdfunding the organization to help the Somali diaspora to facilitate diaspora contribution and investment in small and medium enterprise and other entrepreneurial business. Also provide investment incentives such tax rebates and waivers on excise and import goods of certain goods and services in accordance with fiscal policy measures. We also have a strategy about the strength, appropriate, regular environment and mechanism for protecting diaspora investment, mainly around transparency, ease of doing business, and lowering business risk. This is the last one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Abdi Malik. You've done well, and we recognize that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is critical because if the migrants are not settled in well, it will definitely be hard for them to send remittances back home. So I'll now move over to Mr. Richard Semtongo and request you to just mention the key things from your presentation as we have 5 minutes for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Doreen. Briefly, as a background, what we do as financial sector in Somalia, we do market development for financial inclusion using MM4P approaches, and our focus is mainly on enabling the environment through appropriate legal and regulatory frameworks, access to affordable, accessible, demand-driven, client-responsible products and services. We work mainly by building on existing structures, working both with the private and the public sector. All has been said. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I'll talk briefly about the history of money transfers in Somalia. And then I'll also talk about the current trends, global regulatory implications, and then the key players and their compliance levels. History. The civil war of the early 1990s led to labor migration, mainly in the East African countries, with some of the migrants going to Europe, America, and the UK. And as the community grew, there was need for them to send support back home, and that led to the need for efficient means or ways of sending home assistance to relatives and friends. However, back home, we have challenges, as I have indicated. One, as already indicated, I think in Albert's presentation, we are perceived as a risky destination, and also the money transfer operators are also branded as high risk clients. So what does this mean? It means that institutions that are involved, I think let's move to the next slide. Let's move to the next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. I'll go to the current trends right away for purposes of making sure that we are all at par. So as a result of the need, we had money transfer operators emerging despite the stringent operation and rigorous assessments that they go through, especially in the foreign countries. One of them being that the same institution, the money transfer operators have to open foreign bank accounts, and that has an implication on their capital requirements and then the turnaround. Next slide. Next. Let me talk about the key players. We have in total more than 20 players within the market, but these are the main players. And Mama Express is one of them. Amal, Dahab Shield, Odan, Juba Express, Car, and Tawkal. In terms of related fees, they range from 5% to 10%, the maximum being $1,000 per transaction. Let's go to the next slide that talks about compliance. In terms of compliance, most of these institutions are actually compliant, as you can see, 100%. That is despite the fact that the money transfer operators have to go through a rigorous assessment by the different financial intelligence authorities, especially in America, in Europe, and in the UK. But internally, all the operators are 100% compliant with the global regulations and standards, as already discussed, as already indicated. Next slide. So, in summary, we need to be able to overcome some of these challenges. As already indicated, we are working towards, ensuring that we are connected to the global payments network, and that's the only way we can improve efficiency and effectiveness of the money transfer operators. I think briefly that is it. Doreen, I think I've tried to run through the slides and keep within the 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. We look forward to collaborating with financial sector deepening Somalia on this agenda, given your experience. Yeah, so in the interest of time, I think we shall handle only 2 questions, one for Central Bank and probably one for Albert from the presentation. We shall compile responses to all these questions. Very interesting questions have been asked. Mohammed Hadi, I don't know which question you would want to take on now, but there's one from Mohammed Muse about directed.
Yes, Doreen, I see already two questions.
Yes, yes.
By the gentleman Mohammed Muse. So, but these are very broad questions that. So probably I will handle both if time allows, but I will respond to him briefly. So one of the questions says, so he's talking about the high risk areas and the fact that when I touched on correspondent banks. So as we speak, we have a correspondent banking challenges, but what we are talking here is the efforts we are trying to do as a regulator and as FGS. The key benchmark requirements that FGS is required to fulfill before we meet the correspondence service, before we can get access to correspondence service. So, and it's true, we are high-risk jurisdiction, but what normally our financial sector enjoys is most of our banks have subsidiary relationships or intermediary banking relationships with foreign banks. So that's how our transactions are eased and handled. The second question is about the second question was about the laws. So some of the key anchor laws that CBS issues, we do translate them, but I also agree not all the regulations we have in place are translated into Somali. But if you look at the key anchor laws, like the MLCFT Act, the National Payment System Act or bill, the insurance bill, all these have been translated to Somali for easier interpretation and understanding. But it's a good idea, and we will try the best we can to translate all the legal frameworks we have in place in Somali.
Okay.
He's talking about the reach of these regulations. As far as we speak, we do regulate financial institutions that have operations in Somaliland. Some of the key banks and the money remittances, all of them, the law is applicable. The issue of politics is for another day. But yes, all the financial institutions that have operations in Somaliland have a license with the Central Bank of Somalia. It's a bank, and we can provide data or facts. We can back up those facts if needed. So I leave it to that. I also give chance to the rest of the panel members to, if that all their questions directed to them.
Okay, thank you so much, Mohammed Hadi. I think, Richard, you have one question that we shall respond to at some point. We shall provide responses. Maybe another critical one that Albert would react to from the first presentation is, how do you define the formal versus informal parameter, considering the remittances market for Somalia? Quickly, Albert.
Thank you, Doreen, and thank you, Mose, for the question. It's a very interesting one. And there are some data reported by formal financial institutions such as the central banks, and they're reported to the World Bank and the IMF, but some other information obtained through surveys. There are surveys that are being undertaken. And there are some models for estimation of informal remittances. Maybe in summary, I can say all these questions we take note because of time. We will address them in writing and share with the participants in due course. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Albert. Thank you so much, our panelists. It's been a very interesting discussion. Next time we shall schedule more time for this. We have another upcoming webinar focused on South Sudan on the 22nd of November, and we shall be very happy to host all of you again. We present our special thanks to the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and the Sweden International Development Agency, SIDA, for the trust. We thank the Central Bank of Somalia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Financial Sector Deepening Somalia, and the audience for the very engaging questions, a few challenging ones. We'll get back to you. All the materials for this webinar will be shared, the recordings and the presentation And we look forward to hosting you again, like I said, on 22nd. Thank you so much and have a good rest of the day. Thank you and bye.